As Margaret would do, I should briefly thank Dean Martin Lee of the College of the Arts, and I don't see Wally here, but thank you, Wally. And thanks to everyone for being here this evening and to our panelists. So, this evening's colloquium is the latest in a series of educational events we've undertaken at CAM to celebrate the talent show, our current exhibition, and to bring participants from around campus into dialogue with each other and with you, to share their research and introduce them to USF's arts community and vice versa. Through these events, works from the current exhibition serve as points of departure for conversations about related issues and social and historical contexts, interest in which bridges divides across campus disciplines. Tonight, we're coming together in response to Hannah Wilke's The Intra-Venus Tapes. Hannah Wilke was a celebrated and controversial artist who came to prominence during the feminist art movements of the 1960s and 70s. Born in 1940, she attended Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia, where she studied sculpture, a medium in which she worked throughout her life. Concerned, according to her own writings, with creating a formal imagery that could be understood as specifically female, Wilke shaped and folded such materials as latex, clay, Play-Doh, and dryer lint into labial and vaginal forms. She remains even better known today for the photographic and performative work she produced in the 1970s, using her own body, beauty, ambition, and sexuality as material. Works like the one you see here ignited debate among critics who accused Wilke of narcissism and of reiterating the very tropes of female objectification that she seemed to want to critique in her work. From the early 1970s until 1992, Wilke taught at the School of Visual Arts in New York, and in 1993, she died at the age of 52, 6 years after she was diagnosed with lymphoma. The Intra-Venus Tapes are comprised of 16 two-hour tapes made by Wilke and her husband, Donald Goddard, during the last 2.5 years of her life. During this period, Wilke also produced a series of photographic portraits and drawings inspired by her experience with cancer. Those works, you've just seen 3 of them projected behind me, were shown publicly shortly after her death in 1994 in an exhibit called Intra-Venus at Ronald Feldman Gallery in New York. However, the actual videotapes were not made into a finished work until 2007, after Goddard worked with documentary filmmaker John Carlson to create the installation that Wilke had envisioned while she was still alive. The grid of 16 tapes now on view at CAM in the talent show. The videos proceed in chronological order from the earliest produced in the top left corner to the last video made in the lower right corner. Here's how New York Times art critic Roberta Smith described them in a 2007 review. The tapes might be described as raw material for a documentary that was never made. They show the artist moving toward her own demise, losing her hair, bathing, removing bandages, dining with friends, getting chemotherapy, floating naked in a swimming pool, and communing with her beloved parrot and parakeets. She marries Mr. Goddard in a loft full of people, draws and paints watercolors in her studio and at the hospital. She vamps before a mirror singing I Feel Pretty, or dances alone in her studio. Occasionally robed and turbaned, Ms. Wilke eerily evokes portraits of other artists, Goya, Fragonard, Max Beckmann, and the bedridden Matisse. At the end, we see her groan in pain and pass into a final coma. End quote. The resulting video installation depicts Wilke's experience of cancer in its full complexity, from the most banal moments to the most beautiful, from the comic to the tragic. The title of tonight's colloquium, Thinking with Hannah Wilke's Intra-Venus Tapes, draws on a turn of phrase used by sociologist Arthur Frank. In his book, The Wounded Storyteller, Frank argues that stories of illness deserve a particular kind of attention from readers and viewers. He advocates what he calls thinking with such stories by reflecting on how they relate to our own personal and professional practices. This reflection on the stories of our own lives, Frank suggests, uses the light provided by the stories of others as a means to learn more about ourselves, our hopes and our dreams, our fears and our desires, our assumptions and other possibilities. Our panelists this evening are thinking with Wilke's Intra-Venus Tapes by offering us a glimpse into what they do and how that shapes their reactions to Wilke's art through brief presentations. And our fourth panelist offers the perspective of a physician who has practiced medical oncology for more than 30 years. I've asked Dr. Drapkin to tell us about his work in a Q&A with Artist Megan Hildebrandt was born in Detroit in 1984. She received her BFA in 2006 from the University of Michigan. She then traveled as an artist in residence aboard the Art Train USA, the Art Train, coming soon to a city near you. Art Train USA, an art museum housed in railway cars. Hildebrandt has also been awarded residencies at the Centrum Foundation, Vermont Studio Center, the Creative Alliance, and Starry Night. Her solo and group exhibitions have taken place in New American Paintings, Anna Cristera Gallery, the Museum of Contemporary Craft, Gallery Project, Arlington Arts Center, University of North Carolina, University of Maine, and the Miami Independent Thinkers Art Basel Satellite Fair, the Front Gallery, and the Concertina Gallery. 2 exhibitions this fall at the Front in New Orleans and Creative Alliance in Baltimore have featured drawings, animation, paintings, and writings about Megan's cancer diagnosis at age 25 in 2009. She will receive her MFA at the University of South Florida in the spring of 2012. And can I also mention that Megan and Peter recently got married, so congratulations to them for embarking on that marriage. Dr. Donna Peterson is Dean of the College of Public Health, Senior Associate Vice President of USF Health, and Professor of Global Health at the University of South Florida. She earned her master's and doctoral degrees in maternal and child health from the Johns Hopkins School of Hygiene and Public Health. She has held faculty and senior leadership positions at the University of Alabama at Birmingham School of Public Health and at the University of Minnesota School of Public Health, and served as Director of the Division of Family Health at the Minnesota Department of Health. She is the author of numerous publications, book chapters, and a textbook on needs assessment in public health, and is a frequent lecturer on topics related to maternal and child health, healthcare reform, and systems change and leadership. She has been honored for her work by the American Public Health Association, the Association of Teachers of Maternal and Child Health, the National Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies Coalition, the Delta Omega National Public Health Honor Society, and the National Coalition for Excellence in MCH Epidemiology. In 2011, she was presented a Distinguished Alumna Award from the Johns Hopkins University. Dr. Lori Roscoe is currently an assistant professor in the Department of Communication at USF. Her PhD in Aging Studies was earned at USF, and she also has a Bachelor of Arts degree in Communication and a Master's degree in Labor and Industrial Relations, both from Michigan State University. Dr. Roscoe is currently a member of the ethics committees of several healthcare agencies in the Tampa Bay area and serves on the executive committee of the Center for Hospice, Palliative Care, and End-of-Life Studies at USF, a community agency university partnership research center. Dr. Roscoe's research focuses on the ways in which language influences our collective and individual sense of right and wrong at the end of life, the role of communication in both facilitating and constraining choices, treatment decisions, and well-being. She's interested in how we as human beings, as patients, healthcare providers, family members, or concerned citizens, determine what is ethical, moral, or appropriate at the end of life, and how we communicate to construct, justify, and enact decisions at the end of life. She has written about the ways in which writing the last chapter of one's life may provide a source of meaning and closure, and thus contribute to a good death for dying patients, and how narrative writing exercises for physicians who care for dying patients can reveal how meaningful, problematic, and challenging patients' deaths are to their healthcare providers. Dr. Robert Drapkin was born in Albany, New York, and received his Bachelor of Science degree from Union College, Schenectady, his MS from Rensselaer Polytech Institute in Troy, New York, and his MD from Wayne State University in Detroit. He served as intern resident instructor at the University of Illinois before accepting a fellowship in medical oncology at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City. He has also been the recipient of a National Leukemia Scholarship from the National Cancer Institute and was attending physician and instructor at Roswell Park Memorial Institute in Buffalo, New York, as well as professor of medicine at SUNY Buffalo. Formerly a clinical associate at USF's Moffitt Cancer Center, Dr. Drapkin now practices medical oncology and internal medicine at Morton Plant Mease in Clearwater. He has authored publications on subjects including, I'm needing some help pronouncing this, Dr. Drapkin, acute promyelocytic leukemia, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, and lymphocytic lymphoma. Dr. Drapkin Drapkin is also widely known in the Tampa Bay area and beyond as a distinguished collector of 19th century photography. Works from his collection have been exhibited here at CAM, where Dr. Drapkin serves on the advisory board for the Institute for Research and Art, and at the Museum of Fine Arts in St. Petersburg, where Dr. Drapkin and his wife made a major donation of photographic works earlier this year. So thank you for bearing with me during our long introductions. I wanted to give you a sense of who our panelists are and the experiences that they bring to the table tonight, and thank you for being here. With that, we're going to move on to Megan Hildebrandt and hear a little bit about her work, or quite a bit about her.
You know how to, is this good? Hooters. Immediately following my first chemo treatment at Moffitt Cancer Center, my grad school friends took me to Hooters. They thought it would cheer me up, which was an odd choice, since I'd never been to Hooters before, and I'm a woman, while my new friends all happen to be men. They also brought me balloons. So I walked into Hooters with SpongeBob balloons. I stared in a daze at the wings and the waitresses, and cheap wooden paneling Christmas-like man cave. Everyone was acting so normal, downing pitchers of Bud Light and staring at the 37-year-old waitresses in their Hooters. But my mind was a blur of bleomycin and steroids. Bleomycin, also known as the Red Devil, was the nastiest part of my chemo regime. That shit sure is made of demons, making you nauseous and hairless. Chemo brain was officially setting in, right here at Hooters. I sat mesmerized by the beer that had been set in front of me. The nurses a few hours earlier had advised me I should have a real cocktail right after my chemo cocktail in order to stimulate my appetite. I took a sip, but all I could taste was metal because of the chemo. My drinking buddies, Shane, Biff, and Scott, were all on their third beers by now, and they wanted me to be normal just as much as they did, as I did, urging me to chug it. The smell of overly sweet barbecued meat and sweaty businessmen wafted through the air as the guys talked about art, the girls they thought were hot in our program, cars, anything except the looming cancer mask that was perched on a stool next to me at the table. As I stared at the wings in front of me, they became flying disembodied devils, dancing in between my friend's eyes and the waitress's tits. You feeling okay? I bit into a wing, chewed and swallowed. The burn as it went down my throat was unbearable. Treatment had already started to erode the lining of my esophagus. Yeah, I'm fine. You guys want to go to Pornioki now or what? At my suggestion, we moved on to the Pegasus Bar for Monday night Pornioki. Pornioki is exactly what you think it is. Random Tampa locals and students screaming their hearts out to Bon Jovi in front of a giant screen projecting two girls doing it. We took a seat at our usual table, the motorcycle mama bartender shouting, "Hello, gentlemen," to Shane and Biff, who were regulars at Pornioki. A cloud of smoke hung in the air above our table within 5 minutes of our arrival. Shane's cigar, Scott and Biff's cigarettes. Taking another metallic sip of my beer, something started to really piss me off. Why did I, of all people, have the shitty luck to get cancer now? What made life easy for the rest of my friends? Who had decided I should get punished like this? Who else in this smoke-filled shack had it in their bodies, just waiting to burst out into abnormal cell growth at any moment? Maybe even during Pornioki. I felt like a fortune teller, as though a cancer diagnosis had made me into a clairvoyant health expert, staring at the people in Pegasus who appeared the most haggard and down on their luck, thinking, oh yeah, that guy, he's next. Vampires in white coats. Prominent, malignant mass in the node of this young patient, read bold lettering on the chart that Dr. Sokol handed me. The nurse was looking at me like I was a poor, dead puppy. Dr. Sokol was reading his chart to me, but he sounded really far away, like I was ordering fast food and he was that mangled robot voice in the speaker. The room had that awful, sterile death smell of a hospital. Things were quiet, except for a TV playing Fox News in the corner of the mauve-colored room. The doctor had just done a needle biopsy, and by this point, I knew I had been abducted by a gang of robots, aliens, and vampires in white coats. For instance, beginning next week. But you must freeze your eggs first. Here is a pamphlet. The cover of the pamphlet had a picture of a smiling 60-year-old man on it. He was a survivor, and I would be just like him in no time, said the pamphlet. I didn't want to be a survivor or a 60-year-old man, because I didn't want this fucking cancer. I was sure they had made a mistake, mixed up my biopsy with someone else's. Inside of the survivorship pamphlet was a small business card with the number of a local fertility clinic on it. You have cancer. Freeze your eggs. Told to me by a vampire. How was I supposed to deal with these two statements at once? Biff appeared at the door of my room and paused before entering. Above his head was a schizophrenic red exit sign, flickering incessantly on and off, giving the room a disturbing strobe light effect. He had been listening to the news from outside. Without a flinch, he grabbed the hospital food menu and asked in a South Carolina drawl, "Well, what are we fixing to eat? Wait, this is all free, right?" Once I was out of the hospital, I got up my nerve to call the number. A robot answered. Press 1 to freeze your eggs. Press 2 for the sperm bank. Press 3 to repeat these options. You have entered freeze your eggs. Is that correct? Say yes if that is correct. Yes. Press 1 if you have $10,000. Press 2 if you don't have $10,000. Press 3 to repeat these options. You have entered do not have $10,000. Is that correct? Say yes if that is correct. Yes. Press 1 if you are interested in a scholarship program to freeze your eggs. Press 2 if you found a $10,000 bill on the ground since the last option. Press 3 to repeat these options. You have entered interested in a scholarship for your eggs. Is that correct? Say yes if that is correct. Yes. The option you selected, scholarship program for your eggs, has been discontinued. Press 1 to return to the main menu. During my walk to Moffitt for the first day of chemo, I ran into a mom ugly duck with 50 billion little chicks trailing it behind her. She stared at me with pity as I passed her, as if to say, look at me. My eggs got a scholarship, didn't yours? Cause and effect. At Samantha Nelson's birthday party in the 8th grade, a big group of us were playing spin the bottle in her parents' basement. Her mom was the kind of parent who would leave us alone downstairs, even when she knew what we were up to. This made Sam's house a cool one for parties. This time, someone had suggested that spin the bottle was for babies and we should be playing 7 Minutes in Heaven instead. I don't remember who I wanted to be paired up with for my 7 Minutes in Heaven, but I know I was hoping it would not be Adam Copperfield. He had buck teeth, braces, and a bowl cut, an awful combination to imagine kissing. I spun the bottle, and it pointed to a kid named Craig. I didn't know anything about him, except for he dressed in really baggy pants, Nirvana t-shirts, and usually looked pissed off. I immediately got a crush on him as we walked to the closet. During our heavenly experience, I mostly recall staring at the immense amount of board games that Sam's family owned. Stacks and stacks to the ceiling of Scrabble, Monopoly, Trouble, every game I could think of was there. We stood silently in the dark for 5 minutes, and then he asked me if I was having fun at the party. Everything was awkward as he kissed me and we fell into a pile of board games, prompting crazed laughter from the rest of the party outside. At 25 years old, Craig got cancer. Hodgkin's lymphoma, same kind as I got, also at age 25. When I was diagnosed, Craig had been in remission for a few months already. I wrote him a message on Facebook, asking him how we got through it and if he had any advice. Over the course of my treatment, he acted as a chemotherapy drill sergeant via text, Facebook, and occasional phone conversations. That's just the way it is. Life is hard. You have to get through it. It's gonna suck. Here's how you will feel. I was sure there was a connection between our 7 minutes in heaven and dual cancer diagnoses a decade later. Had cancer been living in one of the dusty corners of Sam Nelson's closet, and we were the two people it decided to jump on? Had cancer been living inside one of those board games we crashed into? Sam's neighborhood now has a giant cancer cluster in it. Was her basement too close to the water source? My mind has made this makeout session the prime cause of my and Craig's cancer diagnosis. Our phone conversations usually revolved around Craig's retelling of his own cancer experience. Megan, I went to chemo plenty of times, 2 of them, even if my mom had to work or something. This sucks. Yeah, I know. I was always the youngest one in the room, too. All those old people freaked me out. It was like we were at a family reunion, somehow related and all in our chemo chairs together, but not talking. But hey, after this is all over, you'll feel like you can do anything you want. Euphoria. Go bungee jumping or something. That's what I did. Bungee jumping? Yeah, and work out a lot and go vegan after chemo, or you might get cancer again. And try to give homeless people money too, because that's just good karma. And make sure you drink kombucha and not use deodorant or your cell phone too much. Do not live near a radio tower or stand near a microwave, and avoid pesticides as best you can. And don't drink out of plastic bottles, and never, ever, ever drink tap water. See ya. Chaos. The day after my last chemo session, I flew to New York City for our class trip to see the museums and galleries. My doctor gave me one of those weird germ masks to wear, but he didn't take into account that, 1, I already looked really weird because I was bald. 2, if a cute guy sat next to me on the plane, he for sure wasn't going to talk to me if I was bald and wearing one of those masks. So I didn't wear it. But I kept having crazy germ visions wherever I went in New York City, the subway especially. I imagined giant germs crawling all over the subway and getting into my chemo port and then my veins. In New York, I got a lot of odd looks from people. I was in line to get ice cream at this fancy rich people ice cream shop in Chelsea. There was a real housewife of New Yorkish looking mom pushing an expensive stroller with 3 squirming kids in it, their faces smeared with Oreo pieces and chocolate ice cream. One of them, a little girl, was looking at me and pointing. "Mommy, where is that lady's hair?" she exclaimed loudly. The mom turned and looked at me and my bald head, which I was desperately trying to cover with my hoodie. There was a seemingly endless gap of time between the little girl's question and the mom's response. Her kids' ice cream dripped slowly off the cone and down their hands. Customers entered and exited the ice cream shop. My heart felt like it would explode out of my throat into tears down my face. Everything about me and my identity seemed to be riding on how she would answer her daughter's question. "Honey, sometimes people just like to cut their hair really short. It looks cool." Human hair wigs. My grandfather is in line ahead of me at the hospital pharmacy. He hasn't said a word since being diagnosed with terminal lung cancer a few months ago. The line grows and winds like a snake, 20 times longer than us, curling around the stanchions and into the hall. Our line partially blocks the way of the bustling residents and interns, charming and youthful, who stroll down the halls of Moffat carrying coffee and Halloween-sprinkled donuts. They always seem to have just gotten out of a meeting where there was free food. It's comforting having my grandfather here with me. He and I sit in our waiting chairs together, and we get our blood taken at the same time out of our twin chemo ports. The nurses kept telling me to get a wig when I lost my hair. "It will look so natural. No one even has to know you are sick, hon." But when I walked through the hospital, everyone in wigs seemed even more sick than those of us who were bald. Something about their desperation to look normal made everything worse. I wonder if my grandfather knows how ridiculous he looks in his wig. When he was younger and in the army, he had blonde curls all over his head. Now he wears an oversized dark brown rat of a thing. But then, if I did get a wig, it would probably have to be an awful one. The nice human hair wigs cost too much. Next, my grandfather steps forward and he's up at the counter now. He scratches his head because his wig itches and shows them his ID bracelet. The pharmacist nods and hands him his prescription. Do you have any questions for your pharmacist today? He shakes his head and walks away. My grandfather drew car designs for Ford, had good health insurance, smoked lots of cigarettes, and died in 1979. I'm an artist, have no health insurance, and got Hodgkin's lymphoma 2 years ago. And you should know that I smoked a cigarette while I was on chemo. Yes, I was like those men and women who sit outside Moffitt, attached to their IVs and smoking cigarettes 50 feet away from the cancer hospital. Those people I judged, I was just like them. Well, you already got cancer, so what's the worst thing that could happen? Biff had said that night. I wonder what my grandfather would have thought of me. Snoop Dogg. There is a tiny, impatient British woman trapped inside of my CT scan machine. She sounds just like the GPS voice in my friend Brian's car. She glares down at me from inside the scanner every 3 months, sounding like an irritated Mrs. Potts from Beauty and the Beast as she tells me, "Hold your breath. Keep holding. Now breathe normally." My British woman's CT scan machine even comes equipped with an alarming blinking red light, which shines directly into my pupils as I keep holding. I wonder if the hospital would ever consider exchanging Mrs. Potts for the Snoop Dogg GPS voice. Just a generational gap, I suppose, but having Snoop Dogg instruct me to hold your breath like a player do would be far more relaxing to me. Maybe they could even rig the CT machine to exhale a cloud of marijuana smoke onto the patient at the end. Now breathe, faux shizzle, so fly.
Instead of waiting until the end to open up to questions, what I'd actually like to do is offer the audience a chance to ask a few questions after each speaker. So I'm wondering if anyone has any questions for Megan right now. I know there are questions out there, because I know some of you when I see the questions in your faces. Oh, yep.
Yeah, there's definitely an intense isolation, especially when you're 25 and have cancer. Wait, say what you said again. Sorry. The mechanisms, sorry.
Well, just the mechanism of speaking to that isolation without directly saying you feel so isolated, which otherwise can be boring for some.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot about being a cancer patient that makes you feel pretty inhuman. And I think in a weird way, patients tend to think of those who are treating us as the enemy sometimes, even though we know they're helping us, which is why I was like, my doctor's a vampire. And, you know, having to do so many tests and so frequently ones where she starts to look really sick, obviously. Like, I didn't go through exactly the same side effects, but I just know it. Like, I know it.
Your name?
Can you talk about how you are viewing and experiencing your follow-ups from here on out to monitor whether or not you're staying in remission? How that compared to
Well, I think there's a definite numbness and sort of tunnel vision that happens when you're going through chemo because you just have to get through it. So in a lot of ways, you don't feel anything. I mean, you feel like shit, but you don't feel emotionally like anything because you're just going forward to the end of chemo. And so psychologically, it didn't really hit me, and I think this is common with a lot of patients. It didn't hit me until maybe 8 months after my last chemo session. And it's like I was starting all over again. Like I was like reliving it a lot. I have PTSD. Like it's, in a lot of ways, for me, it's been worse since ending treatment than it was going through the physical stuff. Because I always knew I was gonna live. I never thought I was gonna die. So, every 3 months I have to go back for scans. And so it's like everything comes back. Everything, even though I have my hair.
Okay, we'll take one more question, then move on to Dr. Peterson.
Based on your experiences with cancer, do you find yourself more intrigued or drawn to artists that have experienced something similar as well?
Yeah, totally. But it's, and actually Megan Bowler has been really helpful with that because, I mean, aside from a huge amount of the AIDS work that came out of, the 80s, it wasn't really taught to me, like trauma art wasn't really taught to me in my art history classes. So it's actually something I've had to dig for, and you've helped me with that. But yeah, of course. And like you were saying, it doesn't all have to be about cancer. It's like I was reading this art project by an amputee who was making work about what that was like after being in Iraq. So yeah, I'm definitely drawn to other artists just to see how they deal with it.
Okay, thanks for your questions. Dr. Peterson, we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Megan, panelists, good evening, everyone. Now for something completely different. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, the invitation to come over to this side of campus. I am on the USF Health side of campus, which often seems like nations away, oceans away. But I think the opportunity to bring a science perspective to art, or to have the opportunity to experience art in its own space, in its own way, was really a wonderful opportunity for me. I am in public health, as you heard. And public health, for those of you who don't know, is what we do collectively as societies to create conditions in which we can be healthy. It's very much a public effort, a public enterprise, and it's all about health. So it's all about communities, it's all about populations, it's all about coming together, gathering together to identify those areas where we can find ways to be healthy. The emphasis is on prevention of disease. The emphasis is on prolonging the highest quality of life. The emphasis is on well-being and the welfare of societies. The tools we use, we collect all kinds of data, we gather information, we communicate, we advocate. It's a very public exercise on a very public theme. We gather data, we calculate rates, we look at percentages, we calculate the significance level of probabilities. So because that's the world I live in, after spending time with Hannah Wilke at her exhibit and reading about her work, I went and looked up how many people live with lymphoma in the United States. And today there are 628,415 people who live with lymphoma. 153,535 of them have Hodgkin's lymphoma, and 474,880 have non-Hodgkin lymphoma. Annually, 48,000 people are diagnosed with non-Hodgkin lymphoma. That's the incidence rate. You this work, we see one person, not whole populations. We see one person. We see one disease not prevented. One life of questionable quality, at least by the measures we typically use in public health. And no data to explain why. Why did this happen? Why did she get this disease? Why did she choose the treatment path she chose? Chemotherapy and a bone marrow transplant both take a serious toll on one's body and one's mind. What odds were presented to her? There was a very interesting study done years ago that when people are given odds, well, they 40% chance, 60%, 5%, 90%. What they hear is, I will live or I will die. I will be cured or I won't. I will feel better or I will feel worse. So we don't see a community in this work, though friends appear here and there. The focus of the Intra-Venus Tapes is not external, it is extremely and intensely internal. Almost until near the very end, when people gather in that lower right corner for the most tribal of experiences, the exchange of marriage vows between Hannah and her partner, Donald. This intense personal focus, the intense inward gaze of the camera, the intense exposure to everything Hannah through this most grueling of treatment experiences and the progression of a very devastating disease. The title is extremely apt, and it is completely different from a public health focus where I spend my days, which concerns itself entirely with things outside the individual, outside the person. We concern ourselves with where the person sits within a family, within a neighborhood, within a work setting, within an environment, within a public policy arena, within a huge political milieu, the larger society. That's what we look at. And in fact, public health is never administered intravenously. I saw so many parallels and so many contrasts in this work. Is this life imitating art? Hannah had exposed herself throughout her career, as we saw. Is this art imitating life? Some of her work during this period is extremely powerful and extremely moving. And we wonder, with impending death, does life surge forward with brilliant bursts of creative energy? Her partner even says in an interview, making art was really about being alive. And Hannah forces us to ask ourselves, is that true only in dying? Or is making art really about living all across our lives? We see what is in effect the gross inhumanity of the treatment, the sterile technology, the colorless instruments, the abuse to her body. But Hannah shines through it all with a fierce humanity and a dignity that endures even the removal of surgical tape from her behind, right there in the camera. She forces us to ask, what is life? What is the end of life? And what is art? What is art if it is not an expression of our deepest emotions and our fears, our last stand against death, a way to achieve a level of immortality? As Megan said in the introduction, we see Hannah weep, we see her laugh, we see her groan in pain, we see her flirt with the camera. We see her very much alive. But we know, spending time with this exhibit, as we enter it, as we leave it, we know as surely as she knew how the story ends. There is no made-for-TV movie recovery. There is no happy ending. The end for Hannah was known all along. But the end for all of us is known all along. So then I wonder, does it matter? Does it matter if we as collective societies seek ways to improve our collective health? Does that make a difference? Does it matter that 50 million Americans have no health insurance? Does it matter that 72 million Americans are obese? Does it matter that 45 million Americans still smoke, despite all that we know about tobacco? Does it matter that 28,000 babies die every year in the United States? Does it matter that 14 million children go to bed hungry every day in the United States? Don't all of our stories, like Hannah's, have the same ending? Hannah shows us, at least she showed me, that all of these things do matter. They matter incredibly. That to express oneself is the ultimate affirmation of life. Even in death, love endures where heartbeats do not. Quality of life is something we each must define for ourselves, and there is no statistic that can ever hide the tears or reveal the joy that art brings to life and that life brings to art. And in this way, to me, Hannah had the last laugh. Our bodies don't like being violated, they don't like being cut upon, they don't like being adulterated, they don't like being poisoned. They don't like being exposed. Hannah let us see all of that through her exposure, her life, and her art. Intravenous means just that, directly into the vein. It means a tube poked through your skin into flesh into your bloodstream. It can mean recovery, response, rejuvenation. It can mean pain, infection, and death. Intravenous means violating that sacred barrier between the outside and the inside. But Hannah has not ever had any problem doing that. Her art has done it all her life. And in this case, she lets us inside to see the beauty, the Venus, that has always been there. The beautiful that Hannah Wilke has always been, regardless of what the critics said. And for me, that reaffirms why we persist in public health efforts, why we do work so hard against the obstacles to help societies create those conditions in which everyone can enjoy the state of health that they desire, the quality of life that they seek, the well-being that enhances the essence of life. So in the end, after sitting with Hannah, I was not sad, I was not discouraged. I was emboldened by Hannah Wilke, inspired and invigorated, which is what I believe she hoped we would be. And that's what I wrote, but listening to Megan, Hildebrandt, I just want to share something that I also thought a lot about while I was watching the Intra-Venus Tapes, and that is that my husband was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma at the age of 25 and was treated in those days with very high doses of a radiation treatment. I'm not sure what kind. That was what they did in those days. He never went back for the checkups. He, in fact, never went to a doctor again. And because he also worked in public health, we had access to colleagues who were clinicians. So it was all too easy to get what we used to jokingly refer to as hallway health care. When you had a cold and you needed some kind of bacteria and you needed a Z-Pack, it was easy to get. And because he was pretty healthy otherwise, he rarely got sick, he had no other symptoms, it never occurred to him or anybody else that anything might have been going wrong. But the radiation that he received all those years ago ultimately destroyed his heart. And it wasn't until he went to a baseball game in St. Louis and they bought the cheap seats and he couldn't get up because he couldn't breathe. And because he was in St. Louis, of course, friends rally around you and they take you to the hospital. And they heard about his history and they immediately called for an oncologist. your business. But if you weren't wearing that seatbelt and you were in an accident and you went through the windshield, you suffered a severe head trauma and you were debilitated and had to be cared for the rest of your life, and you didn't have insurance, and on and on and on. That's a cost we all bear. If it was just you, it might be okay. But when it's tens and twenties and hundreds and thousands of people, then that becomes a cost that may be difficult for society to bear. And society then has to make a decision if they want to make you wear a seatbelt. So that's some of the tension in public health, and it's often what you see played out in the media, and I think even in art, where where does individual freedom butt into sort of a societal cost, or not just economic cost, but something that harms the society as a whole. And we're debating these things right now. If you read the paper, my favorite lately is people complaining about the nanny state, vis-a-vis trying to control what's available to students, grade school students in the school lunch programs. And we all know what's happening to our country. We all know the absolute explosion in obesity, and we know what that means in economic cost, but more importantly to me in human cost. And if children only can eat what's put in front of them, they're not exercising a choice. So maybe we need to restrict or change what's available to students, and then to have that labeled, that's a nanny state, that's the government interfering too much. Well, that's
well as its moments of tenderness, connection, and creativity. A colleague of mine in communication, Walter Fisher, has described human beings as homo narrans, creatures wired to understand the logic of stories. Creating stories from our experiences helps us to organize events in our lives, to chronologically and plot events, to recreate moments of dramatic tension and its resolution. We invite our audiences to share our point of view, to feel what we're feeling, to understand what is happening to us. Relationships are created between storytellers and listeners, and we come to recognize each other in the stories we create and share. Wilke's story of her illness allows us to experience it with her, to learn from her, and to see our own possible futures in her struggle. Like all good storytellers, she invites us to find our own lives reflected in hers. If indeed we're wired to respond to stories and are motivated to create and share them, telling our life story to others, especially a last chapter, so to speak, may provide closure and serve as a means of highlighting the meaning and purpose of our lives. I hope that creating this last chapter with your partner allowed Karen to find that kind of closure and to die with dignity, despite the demoralizing and often uncomfortable circumstances. Stories about one's imminent death give voice to an experience that medicine alone cannot fully describe or make sense of. As Arthur Frank observed in The Wounded Storyteller, stories of illness often begin with medical stories, but the experience of being ill involves more than the medical story alone can tell. Through her art, Hannah Wilke shares with us both her illness story and her life story. Of course, the most satisfying plot line for an illness narrative is to conclude with triumph. We want illness to be vanquished, death to be defeated, and health and beauty to be restored. This is what Hannah wanted, what she believed she was narrating. The working title of this piece was Cured. Instead, her life story ends less triumphantly.
Thank you for asking a very difficult question. I think I can only speak for myself and my patients. I cannot speak for all physicians. But it's very important that the doctor who is caring for the patient at the end of life has an understanding of what that patient needs. And quite often it's not the most sophisticated medical treatment, because quite often patients don't wish to be treated. There are things in their life that are more important to them at the end of life. And the end of life is not an hour or a minute. It's a process that may take months or even years. And the physician hopefully has an understanding of what is best for that individual patient at that point in time. And they have a relationship. Quite often, the only thing I can offer a patient at the end of life is a relationship. That's the treatment. I don't know if I answered your question. By the way, I'm also a hospice director.
Other questions? Specifically for Dr. Roscoe or for anyone on the panel? Yep.
Could you talk a little bit more about dignity? I mean, it's one of those words that is so clearly expressed subjective understandings, but could you just speak a little bit more about that, how you're using it specifically?
I think it obviously, it's one of those things like quality of life that, we might try to, from the outside of the experience, impose our own sort of metric on that. I think when I use it, I'm trying to connect the way the person is dying to the way they live their life, to their values, to what's important to them, and trying to, in the midst of illness, which is undignified, it's messy and it's painful and it's not usually dignified. Just to remember that it's a person there that for them this is only a piece of their story, and to try to honor whatever is important to them, that honors the person and not just whatever experiences they're having in their body at that point. It's again, it's tempting to look from the outside and try to develop a sort of standard for what that might be, and I try to resist that in my writing and work, and try not to say what it might mean to me, should become sort of a standard or a model. And I think that storytelling, if it operates, or this idea of writing the last chapter, if it operates to remind you of the kind of person that you are, even though at this point you might look in the mirror and not recognize yourself because of your illness, it might restore that. It might restore your humanity or a sense of your agency or integrity, whatever that might mean to you.
I was just thinking about your piece on a good day and finding hope and hopelessness. You talk about that quite a bit. And when I was watching the exhibit, I definitely felt resonance with that idea. And I'm specifically thinking of the image where she and her husband are sitting and he's feeling her neck, but she seems so peaceful and at ease. So I guess my question is, do you think that this work really does express hope and hopelessness? And are there any moments that struck you, that spoke to that?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you study end of life, this idea of hope and maintaining hope and how you can give patients unfortunate information about the trajectory of their illness or the progression of their illness and still maintain hope. That's something I think about a lot. I I think maybe that was a concession to the audience because the subject matter is so difficult, and having to pay attention to all of those different things at the same time is already very challenging. So maybe it was a concession to us so that we can say, okay, we can. There's something that looks familiar here. I can look for some sort of a pattern. I don't know.
Sometimes there are moments of what's happening in the tapes that almost goes against the chronology. Like Hannah's mannerisms will emerge, or she'll be hamming it up in front of a mirror the way that she was 8 tapes ago. And so this sort of strange tension between chronological time and time looping back on itself happens in pieces. Thank you all for your questions, and thank you, Dr. Roscoe. So what I've asked Dr. Drapkin to do is answer questions about his practice and practicing what it's been like to practice medical oncology for more than 30 years. And so I'm going to start with some questions that I hope will help us to just get to know Dr. Drapkin a bit, and then I would like to invite people on the panel and people in the audience to ask any questions that you may have. Dr. Drapkin, I was wondering if you would tell us how and why you became a medical oncologist.
That's an easy question. I think the audience asks much harder ones.
I hope they do.
But I would like to, since I prepared nothing for this talk, I'd like to comment on some of the questions, if you don't mind. First, you're all going to get sick at one point. You're all going to die. You have to accept that. I could give you statistics like 1/3 of every baby born today will die of metastatic cancer. But this is life. This is the natural order of things. And everybody will experience some illness, and everybody will experience death. As an artist, you may have a different perspective. You may take things out of context and exaggerate certain aspects of things. But when you get sick, and all of my patients are sick, it's a learning experience, and it's a confused learning experience. You don't get it all at one time. You may ask the same questions to me over and over and over, and I don't mind because I know it is a learning experience and you can't understand everything all at once. So why did I become a medical oncologist? Well, I really liked internal medicine, and the hardest part of internal medicine were the cancer patients, because cancer, unlike an appendicitis, is much different. You take the appendix out, the appendix can't grow back, and you're cured. But if you get a cancer and you cut it out, it can come back, and it can continue to come back, and it can spread. So it's a different type of illness, and it's a very emotional experience. Fortunately, if you get something like Hodgkin's disease, 90% of you can be cured. And it's a good thing because it can be cured. It's unlike most other carcinomas. It's not a carcinoma, it's a lymphoma. It's a specific type of lymphoma which might be caused by a virus. And the red medicine you got was adriamycin, and the blue bleomycin is blue. But we do call adriamycin the red death, and it's a terrible drug. So I became a medical oncologist because I love internal medicine. I like complicated issues, and I like challenges. These were the hardest patients I found when I was a resident and intern. That was the reason.
We've heard invoked a few times the idea of cancer as a dehumanizing experience in which patients feel isolated. Can you talk a little bit about the role of emotion for you in practicing medicine?
Yeah, emotion is extremely, this is a real powerful thing, emotion. And you have to be very, and everybody has them. And there is a disease which can be eliminated or treated and cured, you have hope. When there's disease that is invariably fatal, you have to accept. And there are entirely different approaches. Emotion can make people very sick, can exaggerate. The simplest medical problem can be experienced as a disaster with strong feelings. And unfortunately, doctors shouldn't have doctors should never exhibit emotion, unfortunately, because someone has to be objective, steer the ship, be the captain of the ship, and make the right decisions. Sometimes the emotion can interfere with that. So as a physician, we try never to show surprise. You can't say, oh my God, look what's happened. You can't say that, because it will create a situation where the patient will feel very badly. So we never should, physicians should always try to be unemotional, but friendly, supportive, and try to make the correct decisions. Patients, of course, they're going to be emotional, and families will even be more emotional and less accepting than the patients quite often. So what I try to do is, if there's a difficult problem that I need to discuss with the patient, I really would like the patient to bring in their family and have everybody sit down together, and we discuss everything in front of everybody. And I try to answer the patient's questions, not the family's questions, the patient's questions. Sometimes the patient is not ready to hear the answer of somebody else's question. The patient will ask you what they want to know, what they can handle at that point in time. And that's the answer, that's the question I answer. And sometimes I'm really shocked by the questions that family members will ask that will clearly hurt the patient at that moment. And it's can be quite somewhat difficult. Those are the problems that I face as the family and not the patient usually. But emotions are, scientifically emotions can raise hormone levels and create very intense experiences and can cause physical damage. Bone density loss, muscle weakness, exaggerated pain. All of these things, once the emotions are soothed, become less problematic.
Has cancer been a part of your personal life at all? And if so, how has that affected your practice of medicine?
Well, I'm not perfectly healthy, but I have dealt with my own medical problems as best as anybody can. That's about as close to the answer as I'm going to come, but I feel perfectly healthy now. Cancer has certainly affected my family and my friends, and it's really important not to be the doctor of any of your family members, because then you do have difficulty controlling your emotions and making objective decisions. But when someone asks me who my doctor is, I tell them I don't know any good ones. Try to avoid the subject completely.
Jane?
There was one time, and we're talking as if medicine is one-to-one, and it's always under a calm situation in an office setting. Well, there are certain settings where things are different, and where dignity has no role. If you've ever walked into an inner city emergency room, Detroit General, for instance, or Cook County Hospital in Chicago, all of these places I've worked, there is no such thing as dignity. And there are high emotions, but there is so much work that has to be done in an extremely short period of time, and man's inhumanity to man in these places will astound you. Those are places where the emotions run very high, and they may not interfere with what you do, but you have strong feelings patient to another doctor.
Bob, fortunately, I've always known you as a collector and not as a doctor. But I've always been fascinated by what might be the connection between your collective photography and your day-to-day connection with them.
Well, art to me is an escape.
Art what?
Art to me is an escape.
An escape.
Yeah, when I walk away from my office, I'm away from my office. I want to do something else.
But, and you're probably not going to thank me for asking this, but when I see, for example, those daguerreotypes of dead babies that you collect, or all those haunting faces on all those tintypes and vintage photography, all these images of people that have been long dead, but still possess a humanity and in a way preserve that life, or a moment of that life, and I've always wondered about your feelings, if you have any kind of feelings about these photographs in that way.
If I didn't have feelings for the image, I wouldn't buy it.
Well, of course.
But to me, art is visual impact, and it's an exaggeration to some degree. And if it doesn't move you, I don't think it's important to you. To me, the best photography is something that someone will walk by in a museum and stop and look at it, and then want to come closer and see more. And so it has to be striking. Striking images, parallel processes. You remember that book. And so when I see something that really brings out some emotion in me, and something that's really extraordinary and striking, I think that's what I look for in photography, regardless of how old it is or or anything else. Yes.
I was wondering how you relate what you were saying about doctors shouldn't show emotion to the statement you made earlier when you said that all I can offer a patient at the end of life is a relationship. Because to me, that's a very warm, emotional, personable statement. So could you talk about the relationship between those two?
What I really meant was I shouldn't get emotionally involved and not be able to make objective decisions. But it's when, my patients are my friends, my flock. I feel sometimes like a football coach, sometimes like a priest. There was my responsibility, and they come first in my life, unfortunately for my wife. So yeah, they're my friends. We have relationships, but I try, when they walk out of the office, it stops. So yes and no. Yes.
You spoke about encouraging your patients to have family members present when they're asking questions, but yet you're also saying that it can create confusion and frustration for that patient.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, what are the benefits of actually having the family members there, and is there space for negotiating that if the patient doesn't want family members there? They think that they'll do better for just listening on their own.
It's always the patient's choice. But quite often family members have questions they will ask the patient. And they might give advice to that patient which makes no sense whatsoever. So it's best to bring in all of the family at once and try to bring everybody on the same page and educate everybody at the same time. So there's not as much confusion at home as there usually is. The patient will only hear so much. Each family member will hear something possibly even different, but maybe a little bit more. Quite often the family can be very objective in helping me and repeat exactly what I said to the patient a day later. So, and besides, the family is there all the time with that patient, and I'm just there for 30 minutes. So I have to deal with the good and the bad of the family and try to educate see somebody who's asking questions that are really possibly even inappropriate, I'll try to spend some time with that person in the family without the patient being present. It is really the family that's the most important aspect of that person's end of life. And they're so important that it can't be ignored, unfortunately.
Sandy?
Dr. Drapkin, how does the availability of so much information out in the internet and everything else today impact your patients? Because I remember back when I was growing up, there was a medical book on the shelf in the den. My grandmother got sick or something, she'd go pull the book down, look it up, and say, oh yeah, this is what I've got. Today, the patient, the family, everybody else can, go out and start diagnosing. How does that impact your relationship with the patient? What does it affect in terms of contrary advice, and is the patient taking that advice?
Well, everybody who has a question outside of my office goes immediately to Google. And that's how life is today. Or they have an app for that. It can be extremely helpful. The internet can be extremely helpful. It can be damaging as well. So what I tell my patients is very simple. Write down all your questions on a piece of paper. Bring them with you, and we'll go over each question step by step. If you find something on the internet you want to discuss, great. We can discuss it. In my office, we're paperless. I can be on Google as faster than some of my patients can be on Google. And I'm happy to bring up whatever question they have, what they were reading, and discuss it with them. So it's helpful. I don't find the technology bad. I think it's great. And I think people can get more information and more knowledge about their condition, and makes them feel better most of the time. And whatever bad information is out there, we can certainly review. So I think it's a good thing. And yes, everybody does it, and I think it's appropriate.
I want to do a kind of last call for questions for any of our panelists, if anybody's been marinating. Okay.
One more question. So when you say doctor now, apparently some doctors are supposed to see 6 patients in an hour or something like that. And you mentioned that you spend 30 minutes with your patients, and I wonder if that is throughout treatment. And I'm also wondering, Dr. Peterson, if doctors spend
right there.